All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. We're talking a little bit about this Missouri Texas A&M game this weekend. Locked on Missouri. I've got John Miller on with us today. Man, how you doing?
Doing fantastic, TJ. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for jumping on with us to talk about this a little bit. Missouri 4-0, which everybody expected. I don't think that necessarily shocks anybody, but the path to get there maybe a little bit different than what people are expecting. A couple of pretty easy wins against pretty low quality opponents, and then maybe a couple of opponents that people didn't really expect games to be as close in one score wins against Boston College and Vandy. Bye week probably came at a good time before you get into the heavy part of the SEC schedule. What is the mood coming out of the bye week after maybe an unexpected again, you're still 4-0, but an unexpected 4-0 start and then heading to College Station? What's the mood right now there in Columbia?
Well, it's interesting as a Chiefs fan and as a Missouri fan, my teams are undefeated, and yet both fan bases feel slightly unsatisfied. Just an observation here, folks. Maybe you've got a point here, but for me with Missouri, I think they're really close. I do. I think that people are disappointed with the offense right now, Missouri fans specifically, and nationally. Sure, you see a couple really close games, especially against Vanderbilt. I mean, Missouri really was fortunate to escape with victory there in some ways, but I think Missouri's biggest problems right now are fixable. Will they fix them? That's the question. But it's not as though they're getting physically overpowered or there's not enough speed or talent or anything like that. Missouri needs to be better with penalties. They need to be better in the red zone and just also better with explosive plays, not only on offense hitting some, but also preventing some in the passing game defensively too, while otherwise the Missouri defense has been pretty darn good, when that was more of the question mark in the offseason than the offense.
Do you think it's any one thing? Like, do you think it's a hyper-fix? I mean, obviously you've got incredible talent like out wide with Burden and, Brady's been there for a while. But is there any one thing you think that are they overthinking things? Is there not enough focus? Like obviously like that's the $1 million question, right? Like maybe Eli would call you and say like, oh, okay, well that's what we need to fix. But in your estimation, like what is the main thing that needs to get fixed offensively?
I don't think it's any one thing, but if there's a main thing offensively, it's probably just the new left side of the offensive line right now. I think Marcus Bryant at left tackle, Caden Green, a transfer from Oklahoma. I think they're both good players, but the reality is we're 4 games into the season here. These are both new players. Bryant in particular came along pretty late in the process for Missouri in the portal. So, it just takes time for your offensive lines to gel at times, especially in that pass protection. I think Missouri's been pretty good in the running game so far, so that's encouraging. But if I had to pick one thing, it would definitely be pass protection.
So heading into the Texas A&M game, I feel like college football is so different now, just from a macro level. Whereas like it used to be like you just needed like 2 or 3 games to kind of figure out what teams were, and now with like the portal and man, we had so many massive coaching changes from like literally 3 of the teams in the college football playoff like switched coaches. Like that had such a ripple effect that it's almost hard to like figure out who teams are. Like A&M's 4-1. And I really don't know who they are, right? Like you felt like, oh, okay, well, pretty decent, showing against Notre Dame. Notre Dame then loses to Northern Illinois. And then Notre Dame looks like they're back now, right? And then A&M goes into the swamp and wins, but like Florida's not very good, right? And then they kind of struggle with an Arkansas team that we don't think is very good either. So A&M feels like they've been up and down. And so 4-1 is, probably good. That's not a bad record, and they're 25th, but I really don't know that I know a lot about A&M right now, and maybe through a couple more games we will. But what is, A&M's a slight favorite here. ESPN's FPI has Missouri as the slight favorite, but in Vegas, A&M's the favorite. What's the concern level? I don't know if you want to do 1 to 10 or a percentage of this game going into College Station.
Well, it's definitely a huge game for Missouri, no doubt about that. I'm definitely worried about mainly the defensive front for Texas A&M. Nick Scorton is one of the best players in the league, certainly one of the best edge rushers in the country, and that's definitely a problem when you talk about, hey, Missouri, if pass protection is a problem on occasion, Well, in my opinion, that's why you've got to run the football. Now, in my comments, I had a bunch of Texas A&M Aggie fans come at me and saying, "Well, Arkansas didn't run the ball very well." Fair enough. I hear you, Aggie fans, but the point here is that to me, I don't think Arkansas did themselves a lot of favors by making Taylon Green drop back to pass at practically a 4-to-1 ratio last week. I just thought that put him under way too much pressure. I think Missouri will be smart enough to run the football at least on a balanced level. I'm not saying every time on first and second down you run it or anything, but I think you'll see a good balanced attack from Missouri and just generally a game that's probably going to be physical up front and maybe a little more low scoring than the experts think. So speaking of Vegas, I would lean toward under the 48.5.
Okay, so other side of the offense, right? Not running the ball. What have been your overall thoughts on Brady so far this year, the way he's performed, and then specifically with this matchup? Now, again, if they have him go out and throw in a 4-to-1 ratio of pass to run, maybe not the most ideal, unless it's just working incredibly, right? But like, what are your thoughts on just maybe him overall this year so far, expectations he's lived up to, and then what you kind of expect from him against that A&M secondary?
Well, Brady, I think, has been mostly the same guy that he was last year. I just think maybe he's been under a little bit more pressure than he was certainly during Missouri's best times offensively last season, because Brady Cook, like most quarterbacks, is a different guy when he's under pressure, for sure. So I think that's kind of the main thing for Brady right now. There's definitely been some deep balls that have been just off the mark a little bit. And, where maybe Brady's hitting maybe, let's say, 20% of those throws beyond 20 yards this year, where it was more like 40-45% last year. I just tend to expect Missouri to get back to that at some point. But obviously, the longer you get into the season, you start to wonder.
Yeah, the way their offense was humming at the end of last year, you'd be like, man, if they get back there, I mean, Missouri was everybody's, and they're still 4-0, but Missouri was everybody's dark horse because of the way the schedule sets up. But you still got to go out there and perform. But if they get the offense back to where it was, I, certainly think that they have a chance to do some pretty neat things. And
to that point, I just think it really does take 1 week for perceptions to change and the feeling in the locker room to change, that type of deal. I mean, even if you look at Alabama in week 2, they beat South Florida 42-16. The game was fairly close at one point, and people were going, now, wait a second here. I think even USF had a lead in the third quarter at one point. Of course, Alabama put them away pretty easily in the fourth. The point here is people were going, well, is this that Kalen DeBoer team? And then they look great against Georgia, pull off kind of a miracle victory, and everybody's like, oh, they're number one. No problem. Nick Saban never happened. All that good stuff. I'm just saying, we as human beings can be very reactionary and prisoners of the moment. So I think if Missouri does go out and perform very well, maybe wins relatively easily in Kyle Field, that's not necessarily my prediction. I'm just saying if that happens, the whole narrative and maybe feeling in the locker room can change.
Absolutely. Yeah, the new narrative would be, they win by 14, right? They win going away, which again, I'm not predicting that. So, the Aggies fans that are going to get upset at this just because I said it out loud, I'm not predicting it. But they do that. The entire narrative is like, oh, well, they figured it out during the bye week. Like, Eli's got them right back on track. They're exactly where they need to be. They'll be fine going forward. They set up well against the rest of the schedule outside of maybe that game against Alabama. They'll be fine, right? Like, Missouri's completely, but, if they struggle, if they lose, then everybody, the narrative continues or sways back a different direction.
That's why this is such a huge swing game for Missouri, because if they win this, obviously slight underdogs. Heck, maybe Missouri will be slight favorites by the time Saturday comes around. But regardless, this is basically a toss-up game. Sure. And other than Tuscaloosa, Missouri will probably be at least a slight favorite or at the worst a toss-up type of situation the rest of the season. So to your point, obviously the schedule is favorable. And the way it's played out with Arkansas and Mississippi State, for example, maybe it's even more favorable than we thought to start the year in some ways.
Yeah, Oklahoma as well,
Yeah, Oklahoma, great point. Yeah, they've definitely had their struggles. They've got a lot of injury problems right now.
Yeah, if you can keep your quarterback from pulling a Peyton Thorne, you'll probably win that one. So A&M offensively, we'll get back into the game and then wrap up here. A&M likes to run the ball a lot. Talk to me about Missouri's front seven, your confidence level in that group this weekend.
I'm pretty confident in Missouri's front seven. I really am. They've got a lot of depth on the defensive line and at linebacker as well. Really, the only thing that Missouri's been beaten by a few times is just explosive plays over the top. And I really think for the most part, Missouri's secondary has been pretty strong. Again, I think these are fixable issues of just, hey, just keep as the free safety. A couple times we've, let the play get behind us. The corners, taking a false step inside, gotten beat deep. Obviously, you don't want to do that in the future. To me, just a little bit more bend but don't break defense would be good for Missouri in the back end, simply because that front seven is so strong right now.
Yeah. You talked about A&M's front and being able to run the ball and how good their defensive line was. What about the other side of that? Is there a matchup where you think that Missouri can take advantage of A&M, whether it be, wide receivers and secondary, or, Missouri's front against A&M's, or just whatever, a matchup that you think favors Missouri pretty heavily that they'll try and lean on here?
From the offensive side of the ball for Missouri?
Wherever, entire game.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, if Missouri does have an advantage, I'm going to go probably their biggest advantage. I'm going to go back to that front seven. I just think against Marcel Reed, who I think is a solid player. I just don't think he's a spectacular player. I'm expecting him to make the start for the Aggies this week for the fourth straight week. He's not a guy who makes you scared, but he's a pretty good game manager. I think he's going to take care of the ball fairly well and make solid decisions, solid runner, all that good stuff. Again, this is me seeing Reed play a couple times. I'm not the expert on his career or anything like that, but especially after watching Arkansas last week, that's the vibe I'm getting from Marcel Reed.
Yeah. All right. We're not super early in the week, right? Tuesday afternoon. So we're getting closer, but any kind of lean on this? And I don't know if you've made a prediction yet, or just how you kind of see this thing going down.
I think Missouri is going to get it done this week. I really do. I think this is a great spot for the Tigers, not only coming off a bye, but also Missouri then travels to Amherst, Massachusetts for a bizarre scheduling road game in the middle of the season. But regardless, that's almost a half of a bye week, let's say, in terms of preparation. I'm sorry. I think we can look past UMass. They're not Vanderbilt, who's a solid team that obviously almost upset Missouri in Columbia. So I think that's a really advantageous spot for Missouri. And I think everybody in that locker room has realized all offseason what a huge game this is. I'm just hoping that Missouri, coming off 4 straight home games to start the season, has its communication in the helmet, all that good stuff on lock, because if they don't, that could be a problem in Kyle Field.
Yeah, tough place to play. A lot of people, they'll be into it. Again, a ranked matchup. They're certainly going to enjoy that side of things. But I kind of lean with you, right? Like certainly the Aggies could find a way to win this thing. But I like the spot that Missouri's in, coming off the bye. No look ahead game. Like if Alabama was next week, you'd be like,
sure.
Oh man, what in the world? But I do think it sets up really well for Missouri this week. Man, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of your work? Where can they get your content, John?
Well, on YouTube, Locked On Mizzou, at Locked On Mizzou, everywhere on social media, and of course, Locked On Mizzou, wherever you get audio podcasts as well, Spotify, Apple, the whole deal.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you for taking some time chatting with us. We'll link your show there in the description, so guys, go check that out. And man, we'll have to have you back sometime. This was great.
Appreciate you, TJ.